so we'll have everything together. All right, so today we're going to talk about outsourcing and what's the difference between outsourcing and offshoring, and when it makes sense, when it doesn't make sense, especially for a project management, from a project management perspective. So right now, here's where we are in chapter 12. We're going to cover 13 and 14, and then we'll be done. We're going to skip agile project management and international projects. So what we want to take a look at is understand the advantages and disadvantages of project work, understand what a request for proposal is and what it looks like, identify some best practices, practice principled negotiation, and then describe what the met expectations model of customer satisfaction is all about, okay? So let's take a look, and you'll see that I have given you a star here. That is very important, right? Okay. So outsourcing is the process of transferring business functions, customer support, IT, accounting, manufacturing, to another company, okay? Outsourcing means you're transferring it to another company. And right now, we see that being applied to a lot of work outside of the project management sphere, and we're seeing it more and more applied to bigger projects. Outsourcing has always been done in project management, all right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you're moving it outside the country. So a general contractor, for instance, might have a subcontractor that he or she uses to build a house or a building or whatever. So a general contractor will be in charge, and then they do the tile work through someone else, or the roofing through someone else. And in the construction business, it's so common that a lot of that work cannot be done by a general contractor. It has to be done by a subcontractor. For instance, the roof that I just got put on my house, you cannot do that with a general contractor's license in the state of Florida. They want specialty contractors who concentrate on nothing but roofs because we have hurricanes here, right? We also see that it's being applied to a lot of new products and new services as well, all right? The next concept we want to take a look at is offshoring. And offshoring is when we take a business transfer or transfer the process to a foreign entity, but it can be within the same company, all right? So we looked at outsourcing, which is outside the company. Offshoring is outside the company, okay? Or excuse me, outside the country. And it can be within the same company. So for instance, BMW and Mercedes actually have manufacturing plants in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Arkansas, and a host of other states in the United States. They produce primarily BMW SUVs because that is the #1 seller for BMW products in the United States. So let me say this one more time, all right? Outsourcing is outside the company. Offshoring is outside the country. You can be within the same company and still offshore. All right? So you can offshore and outsource at the same time. This is what Apple did when they had Foxconn make the iPhones and the iPads. So it's in China, offshoring, and it's Foxconn outsourcing, so it's both at the same time. If Apple had decided that they were going to do that manufacturing themselves and build a factory in China, then that would have simply been offshoring without outsourcing. But they still would have hired Chinese workers to do the work. All right? So let me stop right there and ask, if you have any questions, go ahead and chime in so that your voice gets recorded and whoever needs this down the road can answer it. So do y'all have any questions about the difference between outsourcing and offshoring?
Yes, actually, I have one. Can you actually explain, because I've always been curious about this, why outsourcing is not a bad thing in this case?
Yes. So in this particular case, let's look at BMW, right? The primary consumer for BMW SUVs is the North American market. In addition to that, there is solid manufacturing for automobiles in the U.S. But instead of going to, say, Michigan, they went to Alabama and they built a brand new plant. They got a brand new plant out of it. They were able to put American workers to work. And they also got good tax breaks from the Alabama government, okay? Now when they have to send those, they have the finished BMW SUV, and instead of having to put that on a ship, send it halfway around the world where it's going to get damaged to get to a dealership in Atlanta, Georgia, they simply put it on a truck or a train and they haul it 2 hours to Atlanta from Alabama. So the proximity to your market is one of the huge advantages of offshoring. Okay. It's also an advantage when you offshore in that you might be able to increase your market share. By putting BMW plants in the US, they put more workers to work, and we have this buy American attitude in America, which is a good thing. And so that outsourcing then helps them to build their, the offshoring helps them to build their product. Let's take a
Is it
look at
basically
Apple. Wait a minute. Let's take a look at Apple in the case of outsourcing and offshoring at the same time. Okay. One of the main advantages that they had at the time is that nobody on the planet could make the iPhone the way Foxconn could. And Foxconn happens to be in China. And so there they took advantage of the technical expertise. It had nothing to do with cheap labor or anything else. They needed the technical expertise. Now, why did they have that expertise? Because they were already making phones for Nokia and Samsung. So they already knew how to do it. Make sense?
let me ask you this. Is it kind of the same thing as, like, let's take Toyota, for example. Toyota, I don't know if you knew, had a headquarters their headquarters either was or used to be in Texas. Is it kind of like basically that, where they're manufacturing it now in Texas because Texas is a tax-friendly state versus somewhere like New York heavy on taxes?
Yes. So that's another advantage, is the tax advantage, right?
Okay.
But the reason why they put it in Texas, let's talk about Texas versus Tokyo. The reason why they put it in Texas versus Tokyo is because they wanted to open up the North American market. The Texas headquarters of Toyota USA, which is a subsidiary of Toyota Incorporated, runs manufacturing in Texas, California, Michigan, and Georgia, right? So they have 4 different manufacturing plants that I know of. There may be more, okay? Now, often you do send out because of cost reduction, and that's the next slide. Some of the main advantages of outsourcing your work is cost reduction. It's cheaper to let somebody else do it, right? Sometimes they can get it done faster than you can, and sometimes they have a higher level of expertise. The biggest advantage, believe it or not, is the flexibility. By allowing someone else to do the work, it frees you up to go do other things that you might deem more important. So for instance, if I am a contractor, I know that a specialty roofer can roof a house faster than my folks can, faster than my labor can, and so I'm going to outsource that. Yes, it costs me a little bit more because I have to include their profit, but because of that, I get the project done faster, therefore the overall cost is less. The biggest advantage in Florida, however, is that the specialty roofers know exactly how to roof that house, and I don't have permitting issues. And it allows me to be flexible in my scheduling. Some of the biggest disadvantages, and probably the biggest disadvantage, is coordination breakdowns that lead to a loss of control. I have to be on my game when I have multiple balls in the air at once. If I have different contractors going at the same time, I have that. Conflict is another issue. When they were building the university center, I happened to be over there because, I used to be in construction and I wanted to take a look. And as I stuck my head in the door, right there by the calf where you put your trays away, they were putting up the drywall. And they had put it up the wrong direction. Like literally, they built the wall in the wrong direction. And so the general contractor came along and he said, look, you put this up here, you put it up wrong, and you did it before the electricity went on because you're trying your best to get things done quickly, and that's a problem, so take it down. And the guy's like, it ain't my fault y'all built the wall wrong. I got a job to do. And the general contractor told him, you're either going to take it down or I'm going to take a hammer to it and I'm going to bust it up. And then your father, who actually owned the drywall company, is going to be pissed off at you. So what's it going to be? Well, the guy took the drywall down and that was it, right? So that's what I mean by conflict. So let's look at this idea of security issues. So one of the biggest security issues that you might have if you're doing outsourcing of project work is that you lose your intellectual property, right? So Apple actually had a lawsuit going against Samsung because Samsung, you know, the Apple iPhone and the Samsung Galaxy are made in the same factory. And Samsung was able to use that to their advantage, and they took advantage of Apple, and they took some of their patents. So that's why you look at a Samsung and it looks just like or close to what an iPhone looks like, right? And then this thing about being a political hot potato. What do you think I mean by that?
I'm not sure. I
All
should,
right,
but I don't.
it's okay. Does anybody else have an idea about what we mean when we say that outsourcing is a political hot potato?
It's
mean
sort of
full
that
of
you're
yourself?
throwing the issue around and that you are not like first of all, like it's an issue in itself in some cases to outsource, given like the conditions of some of the like when the projects are being outsourced. But it's also in a way you're throwing the issue around like a hot potato, and you're not like nobody might be dealing with it, and it's also can be very unethical to a certain extent. Like that was poorly explained, but something along those lines, I think.
So let me tell you what I heard you say, and you tell me if it makes sense to you. Um, it could potentially be a problem, as in the case of, you know, you didn't give these jobs to Americans, you outsourced the job to someone else, and as a result, nobody wants to take ownership of it, so they pass the hot potato on to someone else.
Basically.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes sense, right? What are some other disadvantages that you see for outsourcing work? Not everybody at once.
Can you repeat the question, please, Joe?
Yes. What are some potential disadvantages of outsourcing your project work?
You can't monitor it as easily.
Yeah, you can't monitor it, right? And if you can't monitor it, what happens to the quality?
The quality would go down.
Yeah. So you can't monitor it, the quality goes down, therefore that's a huge disadvantage.
Also,
Go ahead.
Also, could you say a disadvantage would be the cost of shipping whatever the product is that you're having outsourced? Or
Yep, you could say that, right? So let me give you another example. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner. The tail section of that airplane is actually made in Japan. And when the first 3 of them were shipped here to be assembled, the Boeing engineers noticed that there were red rivets all over this white airplane. And when they looked closer, they noticed the Japanese had painted every single one of them red. You know, like, why would they spend the time to do that and just instead of just spraying the whole thing white like we wanted them to? So they got on the phone and they asked them, said, "What's the deal? Why did you do that?" They said, "Well, you had them red on the plans." They said, "Yes, they were red on the plans because this is a high stress, and we wanted to emphasize the fact that they were high stress." The Japanese mistook that to say we want them painted red, and so they literally hired workers to sit there with a paintbrush and paint those rivets red on that plane. The Japanese could not wrap their head around why would you emphasize extra rivets or extra strength rivets when we're putting the same rivets on the whole plane and they all have the tensile strength. Because in their mind, it made no sense to train someone to do stronger rivets on the tail than you would on the rest of the airplane. Make sense? So they went above and beyond with the rivets anyway, and then they turned around and painted them red, and that was simply a communication issue, right? So luckily it was only 3 tail sections. They figured it out after that, and they went on about their business. All right. So let's look at some of the best practices. The first you need is a well-defined set of requirements. Tell me what you want, and I'll give it to you, right? The next is you need to make sure you have extensive training and a well-established conflict resolution process. You need to take a look at your review process and make sure you have good status updates. Co-location is important as well, right? And some of you can certainly attest to that. When you can't be in the same location, as in what we are right now, then you end up having serious situations where you have to think about how you're going to make things work. That doesn't always work. You can't always do it virtually. Sometimes you have to have face-to-face meetings, and in situations like we're in right now, you just can't do that. Okay. You also need to make sure you have fair contracts, and this last one is of importance as well, having long-term relationships, building relationships with people you can trust so that they just know what it is that you want. All right. Now, there's a couple of approaches that we look at. One's called the partnering approach. The other's called the traditional approach. The partnering approach is the way you want to go, right? Partnering means you form mutual trust and you act as a team and you have open communications with long-term contracts. The traditional approach is more one of suspicion and distrust. I don't know if I can trust these folks. I don't know if I can put the time, effort, and energy into them, right? You look at the goals and objectives that should be similar, but we're gearing it to what's best for us, not what's best for the team. You have independent project teams instead of a joint project team. And then the communication is always structured and guarded. I'm only going to tell you what you need to know, right? And so that's a huge disadvantage on the traditional approach. Some other approaches that we look at are how we're going to critique one another, right? In a partnering approach, it's objective, whereas traditional approach, it's about fear and reprisal. In a partnering approach, you have access to other people's resources. In traditional approach, that access is very limited. I've worked in both environments, and I can tell you working as a partner is much better than working as a subcontractor. All right? When you have a partnering approach, it's total company involvement, which leads to integration, and the risk is jointly shared. Whereas here, there is no involvement, and there's a lot of duplication. The risk is always transferred rather than shared. Okay. Now, what are some strategies? The first is understand that there are cultural differences. Even within the United States and even within Lynn University, there are cultural differences, right? Bella Bourne and I are both from Louisiana. The way you do business there is over a beer and a steak, or beer and crawfish, right? The idea of going to a golf course to hash out a business deal is foreign. Whereas in Florida, that's the way things are done, okay? And so there's cultural differences. There's also cultural differences in that where we're from, you just shoot straight and tell the truth. Here, Florida, New York, New Jersey, there's always nuance and subtlety in the words. I don't like that at all, right? But you do still have to know how to choose the right words, okay? Number 3 and 4 are the most important parts, where you confirm your requirements and you set hard and fast deadlines. All right. So what do you think happens when you don't confirm the requirements? Right. Janice, what happens when we don't confirm the requirements?
Does like all your projects gets canceled at this point?
That's part of it, right? Okay. If your professor doesn't tell you this is what I'm requiring of you, what does the professor get back? Does he get good work or is it bad?
He gets bad work at this point.
There you go. So this is why I always confirm the requirements, tell you exactly what I'm looking for. Right?
Yeah.
Now, let's take a look at some of the stuff that you do before you start with the project to make sure that you've got a good partnering relationship with the person or team that you outsource to. The first is your partners need to be voluntary, right? They need to have a commitment from top management. All right. So the next thing is you need to be a team rather than trying to do it on your own. What I mean by that is you want to be collaborative in your approach. And the stakeholders, the other people other than managers, also need to be committed so that they can include the other managers and specialists that you need. All right. Above all, you need to establish a we as opposed to an us versus them attitude. We are in this together. Right now, in the COVID-19 situation we're in, we are in this together. From our local, state, and federal government, what I'm seeing more and more of is the us versus them mentality, okay? From the top down, it's Democrats versus Republicans. At the state level, it is administrators versus politicians. At the county level, the county politicians want to dictate what's going to happen instead of listening to the local medical authorities. And what really should be happening is all politicians should be deferring to the medical professionals. Whatever they say should go, and stop trying to play around with this thing. But that's not what we're seeing, okay? We also need to find ways that people can get relationships back on track. How are we going to resolve our problems? How are we going to have continuous improvement? How are we going to have an evaluation? How are we going to have leadership? So let me give you an example of how that works in the real world in your class. Actually, two of the groups, because of communication issues and because they could not make sure that they were all on the same page, decided that they were going to dissolve their group. The first thing they did is they all came and they said, we have a problem we can't resolve. What do you suggest? Right? Two of them came and said, we have a problem. Here's what I suggest. Will that work? And that was a much better approach. They said, we would like to go out on our own, do our own thing because we can't find ways to communicate. And it had nothing to do with the individuals. It had everything to do with the situation. Completely understandable. Okay? So they found a way to resolve the problem. They found a way to have continuous improvement. And they found a way to continue to move forward, which in my mind shows that that's a win. Even though the team had to dissolve, the 4 players on the team are now in better positions to finish strong in this process. And so with that, you also want to, at the end of this, have a celebration, right? You want to look at the review of the accomplishments. Think about what we did right versus what we did wrong. You want to look and say, hey, how can we make this happen for everybody, right? Are there special people who contributed more than others? And if they are, give them a pat on the back, okay? Make it where things work out for them, all right? And then finally, one of the things that you want to do is try to build long-term relationships. Long-term relationships have distinct advantages, right? The first is that you reduce your administrative costs. There's fewer people that have to be told about what's going on. You have a more efficient utilization of your resources. And then you also improve your communications, your innovation, and your performance. The idea is that all of us together are smarter than any one of us by ourselves. All of us together are smarter than any one of us by ourselves, all right? So what that leads to is like, all right, that makes sense, Joe. How do we make it happen? Well, it's called negotiation, right? So we want to understand that project management is not a contest. It's not an us versus them. Everybody's on the same side. It's our side. It's not us versus them. We have to work to get this done together. Everybody feels the success of the project. And so then we want to continue to work together. And that leads us to the concept of what's called principled negotiation. Principled negotiation. And this occurs when you separate the people from the problem. It is not Jared's problem, it's our problem. We need to solve it together. Okay? It's not Samo's problem, it's our problem. And so we're going to focus on the interest and not the positions. Let's find a way to make this happen. Okay? Sometimes you have to come up with good, solid understanding and understand that you've got to think outside the box. What are some options that you can use for mutual gain? Use objective criteria when possible instead of saying, well, what you're looking at is, you know, of course you'd say, and whatever, all the things we do that lend to an argument, okay? Now, even with that, I could teach an entire class on negotiating, and I don't have the time for that. But with that, I will tell you that there are times when you're going to deal with unreasonable people. And so the way you do that is you don't push back. Like, listen, I understand. You're pushing. I get that. I understand. Let's see if we can find a way, right? Always be the accommodating person. Try to put yourself in their shoes and have a little empathy for them, okay? You ask questions, not make statements. Well, what would happen if we did this instead of what we need to do is, Okay, what would happen if we did this? When someone comes across with an unreasonable demand, sometimes the best thing to do is just shut up. I have been in so many negotiations when I say, okay, well, I'll take that into consideration. And then I don't say anything else. They'll come back to me with a better option. Okay. The biggest thing that I've had that worked for me is when I asked for advice. What would you do in this situation? Right? Tell me what I could do better. Tell me how I could make it better. And so in that vein, you're going to have in a few days, if you don't already have it, you're going to have your student evaluation of my performance. I encourage you to give me critical feedback. Tell me what I could do better. Tell me how I could make this class better. I don't pretend that I know everything, but I do want to make it better, so please, please tell me what I can do better. The thing that you see on the bottom is by two gentlemen who are from Harvard University, and they came up with, their names are Fisher and Urey, and they came up with what's called a BATNA, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. We call it a win-win scenario. You don't get everything you want, I don't get everything I want, but at the end, we both get something. Let me give you an example of that. And this is a simple one you can wrap your brain around. My wife and I decided we want to go to dinner. What do you want, honey? I don't know. What do you want? Well, no, I don't really want that. And back and forth we go. Pretty soon we're in an argument, right? And neither one of us enjoy our dinner. A better approach to that would be, let's sit down and make a list. Tell me what are the top 3 options that you want. I'll write mine down. Then we'll compare our list. And very often we don't have the top answer. I like steak and she likes seafood. Okay? So what we do is our second choice would be, well, what if we went to a surf and turf restaurant? Both of us are happy, right? What we often do is end up at Chick-fil-A and hope for the best, right? Okay, so now let's look at this concept of what we call customer satisfaction. And customer satisfaction is exactly like it sounds, right? How can we make the customer as happy as possible? And the thing about customer satisfaction is that it isn't up to you to decide what the customer finds appropriate. It is the customer's job to tell you, all right? Now, often we hear stories about customers who go off on waitstaff, or customers who tell us that, hey, this was wrong, or that's wrong, or I don't like what you did. You need to count those customers as a blessing, because at least they are willing to tell you what you didn't do right, and you can fix it. It's the customers who never complain, but they don't come back, that will sink your business, all right? The reason for that is because a dissatisfied customer is far greater than the positive effect of a satisfied customer. If you're happy, you'll tell 3 to 5 people. If you're unhappy, the average person will tell 50 to 100 people, because you have pissed them off and they're going to tell everybody. And then they get all Karen on you, and now you have a problem, right? So the second concept is that every customer has a unique set of performance expectations. That means that what they think and what you think aren't always true. And sometimes you can manage those expectations. Very often, though, it becomes a very difficult task. And so we also need to understand that satisfaction is perception. Satisfaction is perception. And it's the perceived performance over the expected performance. I'll give you an equation in just a moment. Perceived performance over expected performance. What did I think I was going to, or what did I get versus what did I think I was going to get? All right? And so you have to be willing to manage both expectations and perceptions. You need to be able to do the denominator and the numerator in that equation. And here's what it looks like, okay? So let's say, for example, that you rate a customer on a scale of 1 to 10, all right? And they expected service to be approximately, they wanted 10 out of 10 on their service. If they got 9 out of 10, then they're going to be dissatisfied. You hit it at 90%. You gave it everything you got, and you were able to satisfy them 90% of the time. Unfortunately, they come away as a dissatisfied customer because that's what they were expecting. Let's say, for instance, though, you go somewhere like McDonald's, right? So at best, you expect a 5. And if you get a 6, you're happy. If you get a 6 out of that, then you're going to be, wow, this is amazing. I can't believe that they did this. This is the best burger ever. If you go to Chick-fil-A and you get a 6, you expected a 10, and that's going to be dissatisfied. So the same performance at different places can give you different levels of satisfaction. If you go to J. Alexander or Ruth Chris for a steakhouse, then you expect to get good quality steak and a good reasonable price. If you go to Outback, you expect to get what you pay for, and you're lucky if you got that. One of the best I've ever been to is the Texas Roadhouse, right? And Texas Roadhouse always exceeds my expectations every time I go there. No matter how good they are, they always exceed my expectations.
Do we have Texas Roadhouse down in Florida?
Yes, there's several, right? I'll show you where they are when we're done here. Okay, so the next thing is how are you going to manage the expectations? First off, don't oversell the product. So remember, this is a ratio. If the expected performance is under what they expect and you give them better quality service, it's better to over-deliver, right, and undersell. Make sense? Let me give you a concrete example of that. The roofers who put a roof on my house at the beginning of the month, they told me it would take about a week to do the job. So I was expecting, okay, they're going to be here a week. It's going to suck, but we'll get it done. They got the job done in 2.5 days. So they got it done in half the time they told me it was going to take. Of course, I gave them a 5-star rating for that, right? You also want to have a well-defined project scope statement. This is where you put the clearly defined problems, what you need to be solved. Tell me about significant problems and risk. Do not let me, as the project sponsor, be blindsided by your problems. I need to know it's going to be a problem sooner rather than later. So, is anybody watching Better Call Saul? Right? Y'all watch that show? Did you watch Breaking Bad? Yeah? Okay. So Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad are really good TV shows about what it takes to run a high-risk, high-stakes business. One of the things that they always tell you is tell the truth, be truthful, because people know when you're lying. It's the same thing here. When you want to share significant problems and risk, you need to tell people. Tell people about the project's progress. Don't try to hide it, right? Don't try to say, oh, it's okay when it's not. You need to involve your customers early, and you need to handle customer relationships as quickly as possible. Above all, your organization needs to speak with one voice, and that voice needs to be the language of the customer. Okay? Speak with one voice, and that voice is the language of the customer. All right? Okay. So let's take a look at the key terms for this particular slide. So there they are, right? And you'll have that up and running. Okay. All right. Do we have any questions? Right? Okay. All right. Okay. So Cole said, I don't have some of the stuff in the PowerPoint from Canvas, and that's because I cut it out, Cole, for the sake of time and because it's not important.
Oh, I know. What I'm saying is I didn't have the slide, the first one you showed on offshoring. That wasn't in our PowerPoint.
I think I added that.
Nor is this slide you currently are showing now.
This key term slide is there, but I took some of them out.
It's not showing on Canvas at all.
All right. We'll take a screenshot of it because there it is.
Okay, I'm sure it'll be in the study guide too.
It is. Right. And here's the first one, outsourcing versus offshoring. I don't know if that was there or not. I added that one. All right. Okay, so let's move on to slide 13 or deck 13, right? About progress and performance. All right. Here we're looking at what's called key performance indicators. all right? Key performance indicators. And the key performance indicators will allow you to keep track of your business, allow you to know whether it's on track or so on and so forth. Now, this particular slide is just a slide so that you know what a KPI would look like. You don't have to be responsible for that, all right? So let's take a look at what we're going to learn. We've already learned how to use a Gantt chart, all right? And we're going to learn specifically how to look at interpreting the cost and schedule variance. I'm not going to hold you responsible for calculating it, okay? But you will be responsible for interpreting the cost and schedule variance and the performance indices, okay? All right, so, okay. Let's talk about why you create a monitoring system in the first place. So I always want to start with why, and the why on this has less to do with the what, right, and more to do with why you need to do it. So you want to monitor your progress so that you can make changes sooner rather than later. You learned in the last module that if you wait to take on a project or take on the problems within a project, it's going to cost you more money. It's going to cost you more time, and it's going to cost you more effort. So you want to monitor your progress so that you can make changes sooner rather than later, okay? So that monitoring system is going to include what? The what kind of data do you collect? The biggest things are we on time and are we under budget? That's what we want to know. Then you're going to say, how are we going to collect it, when, and who? Who's going to be responsible for this? This is not about playing gotcha. It's about knowing, are we on time? You need to know how to analyze the data and how to report it. Now, some of you are very good at number 3, right? Some of you still need some improvement on that. But there are some of you who don't know what. I don't know why I should collect this. I don't know how. And you'll learn that as you go along. Some of you are very good at knowing how, when, and who, but you don't know how to write the report. And so that's part of what we learn in this class, okay? And you'll learn it more as you go along as well, okay? So I don't know why this blank slide is in there. I apologize for that, right? Okay. So here's what that looks like, right? So an information system is structured so that we ask the questions like, what are we going to collect? We want to know the current status of the project. How much more do we have to complete the project? We want to know the date it's going to be completed and if it's going to be done on time or if it's going to be ahead or behind schedule. What are some potential problems that we need to fix? What are some of the forecasts and overruns, and what are some of the schedule overruns, and so on and so forth, okay? So what we want to take a look at is who's going to collect that? How's it going to be collected? When and where? What are the reporting costs, right? And who's going to report? Now, those 2 slides are not as important because I kind of went over them fairly quickly, right? But this one is. When you're doing a report, which is what I've asked you to do, you give me the report in the format that you see here. What is the progress that you've made since the last report? Okay, that's the number 1 question. How much did you move the ball? The next is, where are we right now? What's the current status in terms of the schedule, the time, the cost, the technical elements? Do we see an overall trend? Are we increasing the scope? Are we decreasing the cost? Do we see something that we need to take care of now? Okay. And then what are the problems and issues since the last report? Did we have to add anything? Did the group break up? Are there new variances and problems that need to be identified? And finally, what corrective action are you going to take a look at? When you look at the process to get this together, right, you look at how are you going to compare it? How are you going to pull it together? How are you controlling for the variance and the deviation in the schedule? You're going to set a baseline, measure your performance against that baseline, compare that to the actual, and take action if necessary, okay? And then some of the tools you use are your tracking Gantt chart, control chart, and milestone schedules. So let me stop right here and chime in if you have any questions for me. Okay, in the absence of questions, I'll assume that you got what I was talking about and we'll move forward. All right, so what we want to do, one of the ways we want to do this is what's called an earned value system, an earned value cost system. All right, you start with this thing called a time-phased baseline. Time-phased baseline. At this point, we should be at this juncture or this place in our project. So right now, the group that's doing the hotel is ahead of schedule. That's because they expected to be approximately 70% done at this date. In reality, they're about 88% done, okay? So that means that they, as far as time goes, they are well ahead of schedule. However, when it came to their money, the earned value approach, they are a little bit over budget. Now, that's because they spent all the money that they needed to up front. They don't have any additional cost. But they had to spend the money at the beginning of the project. So in the first week, when they spent $50 on this and had zero to show for it, they were over budget. But quickly, the project caught up to that, and now they are on budget and ahead of schedule. Okay, so this is what we mean when we say a value, cost, and schedule system. All right. So the idea is that it is an integrated system that uses what's called the earned value concept, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But it's earned value and time phased so that we can compare the actual and planned to one another to see if you're ahead. Okay. So first thing we do is establish a baseline. PV stands for planned value. PV stands for planned value. PV stands for planned value. Okay. Jared, what does PV stand for?
Plant value.
Planned value. Good job. Okay.
Plant.
Right. So don't confuse it with what you learned in accounting, because there actually is a question on there that says the baseline, aka PV, stands for, and if you put plant value, you're going to get that wrong. Okay.
I got you.
Planned. Gotcha. Okay.
I'm
So
sorry, see plant.
it's planned. Planned.
Okay.
I accidentally said plant. My bad.
That's cool. All right. All right. So the planned value is the cost that we expected to be at a certain point. Let's say, for instance, you had a project that was going to take 30 days to complete. How much of it should we have completed by day 15? 20%, 25%, or 50%? Want me to ask that question again?
Yes, please, Joe.
Okay. We had a project that we expected to take we expected the project to take 30 days to complete. At day 15, how much of the project should we have completed? 20%, 25%, or 50%?
50%.
We should be 50% complete. If we have only completed 30%, are we ahead of schedule or behind schedule?
Behind.
You're behind schedule.
We're behind. If we've completed 75%, are we ahead or behind?
Ahead.
We're ahead. Okay. Let's say that project took us $1,000. On day 15 of 30 days, how much money should we have spent?
100.
500.
Okay, $500. If we have spent 350, are we under budget or over budget?
Under.
Under budget.
All right. If we spent 750, we're over budget. Now, let me throw you for a loop. You ready? Okay. Same project. 0 to 30 days. We're at day 15. Okay. We have completed 35% of the project, and we've only spent 25% of our money. Do we have a problem?
The only problem is that it's gonna take longer, but your budget is getting better, I believe.
It depends what you prioritize more. I mean, I would imagine the schedule would be the top priority.
Okay. So you answered it correctly. It depends, right? It depends on how much of it, if we think linearly, we're both behind schedule and under budget, and we should spend a little bit more money to get back on schedule, right? But your answer of it depends is absolutely true. What if, as in the case of the ad campaign for the restaurant, you are almost always going to be behind schedule because you have one task that takes you 21 days to complete? Make sense? Whereas with the hotel project, they were almost certainly going to be ahead of schedule and right on budget because, or excuse me, they would have been ahead of schedule and over budget for the first half of the project because they had to spend all of their money up front to get the project off the ground. Make sense? Okay. So let me ask a different question. Same project, takes 30 days to complete. We are at day 15. We have spent $250 of our $1,000 budget, and we are 65% completed as of day 15. Good or bad?
Good.
Okay. Other opinions? Is it ahead of schedule?
Yes.
Is it under budget?
Yes.
Yes. Is being ahead of schedule and under budget a good thing?
Both yes.
Yes. So this is good. Let's flip the script. Same process, 30 days to completion. At day 15, okay, we have spent $600, right? But $600 of our $1,000 budget, but we are 90% complete. Good or bad?
Good. Even though you're spending a little more in the first half, it's still good because you're almost done.
Okay. So what if that last part takes us $450 to complete?
Then it's bad. Oh,
So
I see what you mean. It depends on how much you need to spend.
That's right. Okay. So that last part would be, all right. So this is why you don't look at it just in terms of time or just money. You have to look at time and money at the same time. All right. Okay, so what are some of the costs that you include in that baseline? All of your overhead costs, right? Which is your labor, your equipment, your materials, all of that, right? So you put all of that in there, okay? Now, what we're going to look at is the earned value. You compare the earned value, which is the amount of money that you spent, with the planned value, okay? The earned value is compared to the planned value, all right? All right. And so then when we look at the project, we think of the planned value, the earned value, and the actual cost. These are called PV, EV, and AC. Now, if we were in class, I would have you do a class project on this, but we've run out of bandwidth at this point, and I don't think adding more on your plate is going to be beneficial. So we're going to skip that part. And if you want to know, I'll be more than glad to show you how to do those, okay? But what you want to do is end up doing the schedule and cost variances. All right. Now, on this one, I forgot to put a star on this, but you need to know what these are. Okay. I put a star on the next slide, but I forgot a star here. So you need to know what these are. I'm going to ask you these as though we had a test. All right. So the part of the variance analysis that presents an overall assessment in dollar terms of the progress of all the work is called the what?
Schedule variance?
That's right, schedule variance. The schedule variance is the part that tells us about everything, okay? The overall assessment in dollar terms. Now notice that we have switched gears here, and instead of talking about time, we're looking at both the cost and the schedule in terms of dollars, right? You follow what I'm saying? So that's where you need to make a mental shift in your head and think, okay, now we're going to put it all together and we're going to make dollars out of it. Now the reason for that is because it's easier to wrap our brain around in the next phase, okay? The cost variance is how much of the work, whether the work is ahead or below the planned value. The schedule variance is the overall assessment in terms of dollar value, okay? So let's take a look at an example here. What you see when you look at this baseline in the middle, this is the planned value. This is how much we expected to have done, all right? So here we are on day 25. We expected to have 75% of our project completed. In reality, we only have 50% of the project completed. So therefore, that's an issue for me, okay? So my earned value is below expectation, but my actual cost is ahead of expectation. So that means I've got to get on the ball and figure out what's going on here, okay? So the schedule variance here is the difference between my planned value and my earned value, okay? Schedule variance, SV, equals planned value minus earned value. Got it? SV is planned value minus earned value. Now, when you look at the CV, the cost variance, this is the actual cost minus the earned value. All right? Okay. Now, with that in mind, and by the way, that thing that I just said, I will add that to the study guide, right? So we make sure that we understand that. So let's take a look. Here are some little different pieces that we can talk about. So this one, where we have a negative SV and a negative CV, right? Negative schedule variance and a negative cost variance. That means this project is both under budget, okay? Excuse me. This project is over budget and it's behind schedule. That's a problem. That gets project managers fired. Okay? Here, where you have the schedule variance is positive and the cost variance is positive, this is where we wanted to be. We are ahead of schedule and we have maybe spent a little bit more money. So that just means we need to curtail our spending because we are way ahead of schedule and we need to cut back a little bit. We're getting ahead of everybody else here, okay? Here, so here we're behind everybody else. Here we're ahead of everybody else. In this one, where the schedule variance is positive, where we are ahead of schedule, but we're over cost as well. We need to cut back a little bit here as well, but this one is not as big a deal, okay? This one will actually get you promoted. This one gets you fired. This one gets you promoted. All right? Now, here's the reason why. Even though you have spent more money, you have also earned more on the project. All right? And you're doing a good job. The last one down here means you need to spend more money. This means you're wrong. This one down here means you need to spend more money. Here's where you wanted to be. Here's where you are. So you're behind schedule, but you're also below cost. This means you need to pay more for people to come in and get the project back on. Okay. All right, now that is going to be as confusing as it can possibly be to you without you actually doing exercises. So what I want you to do is concentrate on knowing these two, right? And understanding where you need to be in terms of your baseline. Your earned value needs to be above the baseline, the PV, and the actual cost needs to be below the baseline. You follow? That means you're doing a hell of a job, and that is damn hard to do as well. What are some assumptions we make? Each cost account has only one work package. That is a very tough assumption, okay? All right. The project network early start times will serve as the basis for assigning the baseline values. So in other words, we want to assume that we're going to start the project as early as possible, and each phase of the project will be done as early as possible. Okay. The next, from the moment work activity begins, actual costs are incurred each period until it's completed. What that means is there will never be a period where you don't have some cost. Now, some of you have already said, well, I'm done with this and I'm just waiting on one thing. That is true, but you have to think about it in terms of what if you were actually doing real work? Like, you guys are ahead of schedule on the hotel project, and that's great. But you would also be, if you were assigning cost to your labor, you would have also spent almost all of your labor cost as well, and you'd actually be over budget at this point. We didn't do that, so I'm not going to sweat it, okay? All right, so the next thing I want you to pay attention to are the equations that you have right here, okay? Sounds confusing, right? But just remember that every one of them is going to be, not every one of them, rather, is going to be on the test. The two at the top will certainly be. Your cost performance index, CPI, is the earned value divided by the actual cost. All right? So I'm going to give you a problem where I give you earned value, EV, actual cost, AC, right? See if I can make this work. All right, so we got red. So we've got the earned value over the actual cost. And I'm going to give you this one, and this one, and I'm going to have you actually calculate those for me, okay? All right. So now what that means is that I'll say your project has an earned value of $100. The actual cost of that project is $120, right? And then you're going to tell me, are you over cost or under cost? I'll give you another one that says you have an earned value of $200 and a planned value of $150. Are you ahead of schedule or below schedule? And the way you're going to know that is the next slide here, okay? If your CPI is greater than 1, then you are under cost. That means that you have earned more than you spent. Got it? If it's less than 1, then you are over budget or over cost. If the SPI is greater than 1, it's ahead of schedule, and if it's less than 1, it's behind schedule. All right? So that's the only calculations you're going to be responsible for on the quiz. All right. Some additional things is what's called the 10-100. One of the things you can do is just assume that all of it is earned at once and only when the work is completed, right? So the other rule is called the 50-50 rule. And the 50-50 rule, it says, okay, when we've done 50% of the work, we've earned 50% of the package. So the way I'm going to ask you that on the test might be the 0-100 rule assumes that blank percent of the budget credit is earned once and at the end of the project. Or the 50-50 rule will be 50% of that, okay? All right. These are called rule gates, right? And the rule gate allows us to better budget and schedule for our performance, all right? Okay, now, these next things, right, these are how you would revise your final project. I'm not going to hold you accountable for them. So slides 13-20 through 13-22, I'm not going to hold you accountable for. But these last things I will, okay? These are all issues in maintaining control of your project. Sometimes the performance measurements are wrong. You have scope creep, baseline changes that'll screw things up, and maybe you have data acquisition that's not there right. So these are all issues, right? Okay. All right, so here's some of the stuff that you need. The TCPI, you can scratch that off the list, but the rest of it you need to know, okay? So at this point, let me stop and ask, do you have any questions? Okay. All right. Any questions, comments, concerns? All right.
Not exactly a question, but I kind of want to give you like an update of my project. So can I do that after class?
You can do that, but I'd rather you wait until Thursday to do that for
Okay.
me, because I have an
Okay.
event I have to be at this afternoon. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
So
Thank you.
let's do it on Thursday. All right. So again, slides 20, 21, and 22, you do not have to be responsible for. I already put them in the study guide though, okay? So if you would, do yourself a favor and just put a big X over those and you don't have to worry about them, okay? Well, guess I don't have an X. I have to make one. All right. All right, so just forget it. That's not that big a deal. All right, so 20, 21, and 22, just put a big X over it on your study guide. All right, any other questions, comments, or concerns? No? All right, so if not, then we'll call it a day, and I will see you on Thursday, okay? Now,
Thank you. Have a good day, Joe.
okay, remember on Thursday, we're gonna go over 14, and we're gonna do the study guide, and that'll be the day, okay? All right.
When we come back from next week was offices, when we come back on the 5th of May and 7th of May, we're just going to be doing individual group presentations?
Yes, or you on the 5th and 7th, if you have other things, you can do your project via saving it, like recording the PowerPoint or recording your presentation and putting it on YouTube and giving me the link.
Right, but let's say we present on the 6th or 5th, whatever it is. Do we need to come to class the 7th or no?
No. So if you do it on the 5th, you don't have to come back.
Okay.